Hey folks, how's it going? Welcome to the very first episode of Humans Not Resources, a podcast presented by Klaar. And I'm Sharthok, your host and also one of the co-founders of Klaar. And right about now, you might be thinking, another HR podcast? Well, just hear me out. So the intent behind Humans Not Resources is very simple. Klaar at heart is a performance management platform. And what we realize is that performance management is really at the cusp of evolution. It is changing, it is evolving, and Humans Not Resources equips you with everything that you require to master the art of performance management. So over the course of the next few weeks, you will find people leaders right here from the US, from India, from other parts of the world as well, joining me for short 20-25 minute episodes and sharing really actionable insights on how they have designed the best fit processes, on the sort of trade-offs, on how to get buy-in, on how to select the best fit tools, and so on and so forth. Some of them have selected Klaar. So with that being said, in today's very first episode, I was incredibly fortunate to be joined by Jen Paxton. Jen has been Chief People Officer and in a lot of HR leadership roles across multiple companies, and she shares some really amazing actionable insights. So without much further ado, let's jump right into the first episode of Humans Not Resources. Today we are lucky to be joined by Jen Paxton. So Jen has had an amazing career. If you see her LinkedIn, you'll find multiple different trajectories. So right from being in people leadership roles, a VP people across multiple companies, you would find her being the co-founder of a platform which later on got acquired. And now she's heading HR for Roofr. And Jen, thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited.
Thank you. I'm so excited to chat as well. Excited to meet you, and I love that you have that same kind of journey. I'm going from working in that HR practitioner space to co-founding your company too. So good, hopeful for a very good chat.
Awesome. I got one thing for you in my screen. Since you are from the Boston Conservatory, Berkeley, I got through there. I couldn't unfortunately go finally, but that's my bass guitar right there. I still play it almost every day. So I think that's another common trait.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like I've met so many people in HR that have some kind of music or like creative background, and it plays such a crucial role in just problem solving. And honestly, I think sometimes like presence as well.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's a lot of similarities there.
Awesome. So I'll lay out the structure and we can deep dive right into it. So Klaar is essentially at heart a performance management platform, and performance management as a concept, obviously, like you and I both know, it has been there for like quite some time now. And I see your reaction there. So yes, it's been there for quite some time, which sort of leads me to my first question. When I speak to people leaders, now Klaar is live globally, and fortunately, I can speak to people leaders. One thing which sort of comes across is, which unites all of these people leaders across sectors, across geographies, is that there are multiple PMS platforms present, and they're all great. Most of them are great at what they do. The first question is, why do people still hate PMS? Is that something which you have felt as well across your companies? And if so, why?
I feel like people probably have at best a love-hate relationship with performance management in general, like necessary evils in some instances. And I have to say that sometimes I feel that way as well. No matter how great a process is that you create, it's still work that people are having to do. And so the biggest thing I think that comes about with performance management systems in particular is that there can be a lack of kind of consistency or clarity. Like there's so many opportunities for communication missteps or
Yeah.
miscommunications along the way, especially if you're onboarding into a new platform in particular. And also I feel like some of the systems out there are stuck in like the 1950s. They're so clunky and they don't move
Yeah,
as fast. My world is startups. And so I am used to constant iteration, failing fast, learning from it, and then, getting better. And
absolutely.
some platforms are they can be such behemoths too and rigid that does not actually adapt with like the fluidity that you want feedback to have.
Yeah,
And then there's also such a stigma behind performance management in general, where it's like, okay, one time a year, I'm going to write all my feedback in, and that's when I'm going to deliver it. And the employee
yeah,
gets that and is like, I did this like 6 months ago, or maybe it was when I was first onboarding, and you're just telling me this feedback now. I could have been
yeah,
doing better. And so it almost instills this mentality where people bottle these like things up waiting for this. And
yeah.
as an employee, I've had this happen to me as well. And as an employee, I'm like, I would love to start the conversation in a different way. Could I
Mm.
have feedback frequently? Like every
Yeah,
one-on-one, what feedback do you have for me? I'm trying to do that in my one-on-ones with my direct reports, and also in my one-on-one with my bosses, my CEOs,
manager.
my co-founders as well. So I think that's something that just happens, is that like level of infrequency. And
Mm.
then there is also just like this stress and anxiety because you're writing your thoughts
Absolutely.
down and somebody's going to read them. And I think there can be a level of like scrutinization, not only on the employee side, but on the manager side to kind of get it, have to get it perfect too. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of things I think that happen in this where it leads to people hating performance management systems.
gotcha.
Yeah.
If I'm hearing you correctly, and tell me if my summary is correct, um, it's a stress-inducing process in general, like that entire writing part of it and getting feedback. Anything which is sort of uncertain, obviously, is not welcome by humans. So stress-inducing process platforms. Some of them are pretty clunky. I have used them. That's why Klaar that's how the journey happened. But clunky platforms, stress-inducing process, and infrequent feedback. That's really where we are at. I'm sort of deviating a little bit, Jen, from the questions that I had shared. Just piggybacking off something which you mentioned, that let's say I want more feedback, and I think people in general want more feedback. What's the incentive for the other person to give me feedback? Because that is still an overhead for that person, because that person is doing probably sales, operations, finance, whatever it is. What's the incentive for that person to give me feedback? Have you found your way around that, or is that a common question which people?
It is still a common question. And it's a common pain point that people have as well. It's like, if I give you this feedback, what do I get out of it? Or what does it do for me? And
Yeah.
a lot of conversations that I'll have with managers around giving the feedback is you're giving kind of that short-term pain for those long-term goals.
Mm,
Because if you're giving a person feedback and they're improving, number one, you're not having to give them that feedback again, but there's usually a purpose behind that feedback. So it's like, hey, you need to do this a certain way because then it saves you time, or hey, you need to do this because this kind of particular behavior came off a weird way. So then you're having follow-up meetings with those people to help kind of with that behavior. What you're doing is you're giving that feedback. So it either saves you time, money, productivity, energy. It's going to save you something in the long run. And actually flip that, and you're talking with managers about kind of feedback, like, why are you giving them this feedback? What's the purpose for you on this? And it all comes
mm.
back to that level of purpose where you're trying to up level your team, but they can't
Mm,
learn if you're not giving them direction. Like what's working well so they can double down on it, what's not working so you can correct it.
that is awesome. That is awesome because I think a lot of HR leaders still struggle with convincing managers to have those one-on-ones, to give those feedback. That's really actionable. Awesome. Um, I latch on to another thing which you said, which I have said in the past, and it's pretty fascinating. Performance management is a necessary evil. You mentioned that as well, and a lot of us feel that way. Now, my question, now that I'm sitting on the other side of the table, is w- have you ever wondered that what would happen if a company were to suddenly stop performance management, or not start performance management at all? Would there be any repercussions? Why is it necessary? Evil, I think I get why people think of it as an overhead and stuff like that. Why is it necessary?
Yeah, I have experienced this kind of the repercussions a few times because some of the companies that I've come into are either companies that have never really had a people leader in the space or have gone for some time without a people leader, which usually means if there's not a people leader there driving this, there's not performance management going on. And so
Absolutely.
the first ones that I can think of are, as a people leader coming in, a rush for people to either go on performance improvement plans, which I think that's a whole other like big topic that we could cover. But the other side of it is like firing people and like understanding like, oh, we can finally fire these people because like they're not performing well and we finally have a process to do it. So that can happen. The other side of it is there's just a lack of accountability. Performance management and performance processes don't have to be just one time a year. They could be continuous as well, which is kind of a process I'm trying to get us to slowly and surely. But there's so much lack of accountability when you're not actually tracking performance. Because again, people don't know if they're doing things well if you're not giving them feedback and kind of confirming kind of what they're thinking. Which means that you're also having, a lack of productivity potentially on this end. You're potentially having a lack of motivation. So that employee engagement side. Again, if you're not having some kind of performance management process where you're giving people feedback, then they don't know they're doing well. They might get disengaged. Then they're not performing well. Then they're eventually leaving. So then you're getting, people that are turning over, which again leads to more recruitment costs, which then again leads to, the business thinking about their burn rate. That burn rate's going to go up, means that level of, path to profitability, if you're not profitable, is going down. It all feeds into the same thing. So eventually your business is not thriving. It's even, flailing to survive, right? The other side of it is on the performance management, and why performance management is good is people get career paths that way. They know, what am I doing right now?
Absolutely.
And where can I go in the future? So if you don't have performance management, you most likely are not having career paths as well and career development conversations, because it's a framework for those conversations to be had. Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's a challenge, I think. There is a flip side to that where you think about, if you didn't have a performance management system, are you actually giving continuous feedback? Is that a possibility? Like if you didn't experiment and you didn't have performance management, would managers naturally tend to give that continuous feedback? And sadly, I have to say that experiment has failed in a few instances that I've experienced as well.
No, absolutely. I think you touched upon some really, really strong points there. In my experience, like now that I'm a founder as well, and sometimes I fall prey to this thought process that sometimes performance management only gets coupled with, the annual reviews and the ratings, which are just getting published. But it's so much more than that, like you mentioned. And I think when we can translate in business terms, like exactly you mentioned, the burn rate goes up, the runway sort of starts coming down. I think when that thing gets understood by leaders, I mean, there's like a buy-in or a support from the top as well, instead of having to push everybody, to adapt to PMS.
Yeah.
Got it. Awesome.
Yeah. But there is a lot of change management that you have to do with that too, because talking about kind of that one time a year when you have that that annual review, that's ingrained in a lot of people as like the norm. So then if you changed it to like a quarterly review or even, twice a year, people are still thinking, even if they got a raise or a promotion that like 6 months ago, they're like, oh, we're going through a review, like I'm going to get a raise or a promotion. So you have to be very intentional about, this could be a potential for a promotion or, or a raise. But also, we're trying to do this so we have more frequent feedback sessions that are established. So it's a little, it's an interesting needle to thread, we'll just say.
No, I'm smiling because it's funny that you mentioned this, because in one of my previous companies, we moved to a quarterly cycle, and one person gave the feedback that I haven't had a raise since my last performance review, which was 3 months back. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, we just had it, but yeah, that I think we need to be intentional and also convey to people why we are doing 2 or 4 times a year. That's awesome. Got it. I'll move to my next question, which is, so now that we know that performance management, why it's necessary and why it exists. I was seeing your career, and I was absolutely blown away. So you would have designed multiple performance processes. I'm assuming you would have done that. Do you have favorites? Can you play favorites among those processes, and which ones seem to work better than the others? Or does it depend on the industry, the segment? What does it depend on?
Honestly, it depends on the company culture, the size, the manager maturity level, the people team's capacity. I have
Yeah.
designed a few, and that has definitely factored in, like the people team capacity has factored in a pretty good bit, because a lot of the administrative side is going to be on the
Hmm.
people team. And
Yeah.
so if I'm a smaller people team, I might have to scale back what I thought I was going to do. And maybe we were just doing a start, stop, continue. I think
Yeah.
that's all we can maybe muster right now, which even with like that training of managers, having them to understand how to even fill in a start, stop, continue, that's still a good amount of work. Whereas I've
Yeah.
had some more organizations that I've been able to develop competency based ones. And it goes
Hmm.
even more specific, where you have role specific competencies and you
Yeah.
have a scale. So the last one that I designed is actually a learning to excelling scale. And so you're learning, you're developing, you're achieving, you're excelling. And within that one, you even had to define, how does a manager define a person's organizational skills at learning versus developing versus
Yeah.
achieving versus excelling. And that one was more complex, but
Hmm.
the kind of backside of it, or the product of that, is that you have a lot of very specific and fruitful conversations that employees get out of it. So
Yeah.
so it really depends on the company size, again, the maturity of the managers, and then also your people team capacity in a sense, on which is going to
Hmm.
work for you. I have used multiple tools. I have also done Google Docs as well. At
Yeah.
a few smaller companies, like, we just got away with Google Docs, and it worked for us at the time. It would not scale with us because
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
get the admin burden side. But yeah, I think designing them, you really have to take in all of those factors before you just jump right in. It's also the same before you even pick a platform that you might use. You really have to take in all of
Mhm.
those factors as well,
Yeah.
because a bigger platform, or like even a more robust platform, might work for some organizations, but it might not work for yours. So you have to really,
Absolutely.
really consider all of those.
And absolutely. I mean, those points are like so on the money. A related question would be that you mentioned a really interesting thing, that managers also have to be given a lot of training, and not training per se, but they need to understand that how do they approach the questions, and what do the competencies mean. Has there ever been a time when it has sort of backfired, where you attempted a process which was probably a little too mature and it sort of backfired? Has that ever happened? I mean, is that a possibility at all?
It's always a possibility. And there,
Hmm.
for this last one that I did at Roofr in particular, we did a V1 where we actually had just our engineering team went through the process first to see
Gotcha.
how it was going to go, because it was a new platform, new system, new managers, like new everything pretty much.
Yeah.
And so we weren't sure how it was going to be received by employees, what learnings we were going to get. So if we did the entire, 140 people versus the 40 people in engineering, we might
Absolutely.
get different results, and it might fail.
Hmm.
In a sense, at least fail. So I think there was, at least rolling out that first V1, there was a lot of learnings that we did amongst ourselves. So with that
Hmm.
manager training in particular, where managers were giving feedback, but also calibration, there's always going
Hmm.
to be that training. Um,
Yes.
because you want to be in alignment. You want your managers, your line managers and your directors and your executives to be in align with how they define, like, how does our department define this versus this versus this, especially if you have a department with multiple managers, where I'm sure you've had, managers or experienced managers who they're, I don't want to say easy graders, but
Yeah.
they have, higher scores that they give everybody on their team. And then you have those other managers that are more critical, where they're like
Yes.
lower scores. And so you're having to really like dig through and understand, okay, this person said this, but they really meant this. And so you have those
Yeah.
calibration meetings ahead of time. So it's not only giving, like having these trainings on how do you give feedback, because there's also managers that you're doing a great job, and that is their feedback.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
employees are like, but what am I doing well? Can you give me any specifics whatsoever? Like, why did I get this? Why did I get this one part on the scale? Like, what defines that? So yeah, it can be a multi-prong, multi-step process for, I mean, it should be anyway. So yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, again, I'm smiling a lot because at Klaar we have been, building with feedback from customers and recently released calibrations. And we told a few customers that we would love to sit in your calibration session so that we understand how you're using it. And I had forgotten my own days of calibration when I used to run it as HR, and it sort of brought me back to it. It was a complete war room, like a complete, war room where different people are chiming in with different things. Yeah, completely get what you're saying in terms of that level of standardization and maturity to be probably at a similar playing field for that to happen.
And you're not
Gotcha.
even layering in on compensation, right? On that end, like layer in
I
that.
was coming to that. Yes. That was, yeah, you preempted it. That was my next question, that a lot of times, including me, when I was in HR, I hear HR leaders sort of lament or gripe, oh, my company just associates performance reviews with compensation. But my question to you is that compensation is an outcome or one outcome of reviews, right? And probably something which employees are looking forward to, at the end of the review process. Is it is it wrong for people to associate performance management or performance reviews with compensation? And if it is, how do you decouple these two things, or do you need to decouple at all?
Yeah. I don't think there is a possibility to decouple them, because I've gone through multiple conversations with employees and managers around this, and even at the company I'm at now with Roofr, I'm not sure it is you're able to really truly untie one from the other. I think it's
Mm,
hardwired in our brains. And if anybody has done it perfectly, I would love to talk to them and see what they have done, because I have ran sessions where the introductory session that I will give for all employees, like introducing our process and everything, will say at least
mm,
3 times, compensation is not going to be talked about in this session. Like
yes.
this round is not going to be about compensation. It's just about feedback. I still
Mm,
get those managers in the very end who are like, hey, I would like to promote this person. I'm like, cool, okay.
yes.
But and then I get those managers as well. It's like, hey, like I gave this person, the feedback, and they're lower than our expectations. But at the very end of the conversation, the employee would say, like, so no raise then? Still.
Yeah.
And this, even after we've like preempted it. So again, it's hardwired in the brain to think that after you've gotten a performance review, that's when my like
Mm,
raise is going to hit in or anything. No matter, like, I mean, again, like I can imagine the one that you said with the quarterly, where I'm
yeah.
trying to do just twice a year, but I can
Mm,
imagine quarterly, like number one, it's 4 times a year when managers are going to have that conversation and say, hey, you're not getting a raise this time, but this
yeah.
is when we'll plan, like this is when we'll plan for it, or this is when you're ready. Or it's 4 times a year when employees are going to have to like ask that really uncomfortable question of like, hey, am I getting a raise this round? Which is,
Yeah.
again, time for those conversations, and just tackling them and working with them is a challenge.
Is that possibly also why managers might be a little, shy of performance management processes or performance reviews because they know they have to have these uncomfortable conversations?
Yeah, the word uncomfortable is exactly it. I think that sometimes humans, most times, let's say most, I don't know. I hate making generalizations, but I'm like, oh, it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. Money is something that people struggle to talk about. And
Yeah.
even myself, like having conversations around performance and like cash compensation, it's still a struggle. And I do it on like the recruiting side all the time. Like it's like
Yeah.
breathing air to me on that end. But the other side of it, where it's you, it's a challenge. It's a
Mm,
challenging conversation to have. And so I think managers do feel uncomfortable around it, and they'll potentially shy away from it. Just like when giving kind of critical feedback as well, it can be really
yeah.
challenging to shy away from. There's also cultural aspect to it as well. Different cultures have different ways of giving feedback.
Yep.
And so that can factor in as well, just to kind of how they've been, how they've grown up and kind of what they've been exposed to and what they haven't been exposed to as well.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, I think one more thing which I hear HR leaders sort of mention a lot, and I don't see a resolution as of yet, which is, or let me flip it this way. In your processes, have you encountered the not so famous bell curve? Have
Mhm.
you encountered that? Is there a way to truly get out of the bell curve, especially when the company grows in size? Let's say a 200%, 500% company. If not the bell curve, what would you go for, which would do as good a job as the bell curve in terms of differentiating, top performers, low performers, and the rest?
Yeah. I mean, going back to kind of that uncomfortable theme that we talked about, it's really hard to have managers stack rank a person.
Yes.
I've had them like plot them kind of on a quadrant just to see like where's that high performance or that high potential. And it's still a really challenging thing because one thing that we did to try and have managers almost like make a decision on performance
Mm.
was instead of having a 5-point scale where you could have a neutral, we took
Mm.
5 point away and made it a 4 point.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
you really had you're developing or you're achieving this. Like
Mm.
you're doing well or you need a little bit of additional work. There's not a middle on that end. And so going back to that calibration, some managers would treat that as like, okay, I'm just going to skew for the bot, like skew for like they're achieving it, like they're getting it done, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, how are they achieving this? Tell me more. Like, what are their achievements here? And like having to get
Mm.
that substance part to back it up. But I'm not sure there's really a way to get away like around that bell curve side
Mm.
because
Yeah.
the other thing you have to think about when you're building a company, not every person in the company is going to be the highest performer possible. There's always going to be some kind of
Absolutely.
differentiation. You do need kind of those kind of solid rock people that are like they want to do kind of the job that they are doing. They do it
Yep.
well, but there's not that kind of additional delta there for them.
Yeah.
I think you kind of
Yeah.
always have it.
They are the steady ones, right? I mean, they are the ones who keep the ship, afloat. And I was noticing that when you mentioned the scale of learning, developing, achieving, and excelling, it was a 4-point scale, and it sort of does away with the central tendency. What I have noticed in a 4-point scale is managers sort of then start hitting the mark three, which is essentially achieving. And I think that's where your question was, that how are they achieving? Tell me more. Gotcha. So the answer probably to me is one of the ways to explore is, instead of getting people to stack rank, it's more of I won't say binary, but more of an outcome, like, are they achieving? Are they not achieving? Can we decide on that? Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. My last question to you is something which everybody's talking about. Internally at Klaar, we are having fights every day, which is AI. There's a lot of talk about AI in HR. I want to zero in on AI in performance management, talent management. Is it a gimmick? Do you see actual pain points being solved by AI? How do you see AI factoring in this entire space?
Yeah. I mean, leveraging AI has automated some of our processes. In particular, managers sometimes don't know how to phrase some kind of feedback, and so there
Mm.
is a way to leverage AI where it's like, give me a way to phrase like this critical feedback because of this, this, and this, and here's kind of example one, example two, example three, and then AI
Got it.
will spit out oh, you could say it like this, which is
Got it.
right? From just a words kind of capacity. The
Mm.
other side, I think that's been really helpful is we have upwards. So we did 360s, so 360
Hmm.
reviews. And so we had a lot of upward feedback that managers got. So some managers have, multiple direct reports.
Combining that.
Yeah, so combining all of those and finding key themes was really helpful from an AI perspective as well. Given we try and anonymize as much as we can on that end, because I'm still a little
Yes.
skeptical on AI as well. But it was very helpful because synthesizing kind of that data and understanding, okay, what are the themes that are coming in? Whereas you're still QAing things on the end, you're still saying,
Yep.
okay, like you're reading everything still, but you're having those things that are already being picked up and you're, oh, like that makes sense. Yes, I can do that. We could do this. Like, oh, multiple people said X. So I think that
Got
in,
it.
in those ways in particular, AI has been quite helpful.
Got it. That is awesome. I think that's the first time when I have gotten a concrete answer to this question, how it can be factored in performance. I think that'll help a lot of HR practitioners because you're a part of multiple communities, I'm sure, and so am I. I think this is one of the most common questions I see nowadays that, hey, can you help me with some use cases of AI? And I'm like, you're looking at it the wrong way. I mean, you should have the use cases and then sort of try and understand if AI can solve that. Awesome. Jen, it was such a pleasure having you on this episode. I can't wait to release this on LinkedIn on multiple platforms. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, it was my pleasure. Thanks for the chat.
Bye.